Does sidechain compression sound like something that's gone terribly wrong with your bike? Or maybe you know what it is, but you don't always get the results you're expecting. Either way, you're in the right place to get the consistent results you're looking for. I'm going to teach you why and when you could use a technique like sidechain compression, how to set it up, and how to use it. And make sure you stick around to the end of this video because I've got some bonus tips on sidechain compression that you're going to love. Now, first of all, what is sidechain compression? So the style of mixes that usually have a lot of sidechain compression are more along the lines of EDM, pop, and dance music. But that doesn't mean it's exclusive to those genres. It can be a very helpful technique in any genre. I put together a simple, classic 128 BPM EDM style track to demonstrate. It's not fully produced, written, or mixed, so go easy on me, but it does contain an example of sidechain compression. And I've printed the track for you so that you can hear what it sounds like, and it sounds like this. If you're not sure what to listen out for, then it's the pumping sound in the low end. Compressors dynamically alter the signal and sometimes produce artifacts known as pumping and breathing. Pumping means quick, noticeable changes in level. So just see if you can hear that again. Now, without the sidechain compression, here's what that sounds like. You might notice already that the low end sounds more static. It just doesn't sound as exciting. The whole track just doesn't sound as exciting. There's much less movement, and it just doesn't appeal as much as when the sidechain compression is engaged. And just to emphasize this point a bit further, let me play you back the low end only with, first of all, sidechain compression engaged and on, and secondly, without the sidechain compression. Now, I'm sure you could hear that quite clearly that the second example without the sidechain compression on sounds quite a lot more static. There is some movement in that bass part, some modulation in it, but the sidechain compression really hits that home, that four on the floor feel with the kick drum and the bass combined. So first of all, let me explain how sidechain compression is set up. Sidechain compression happens when an input signal from a source or track in a mix has been selected as a trigger or key input for the compressor of another track. That key input decides how much gain reduction takes place on the output signal. If that all sounds a bit technical, don't worry, it's not, and I'm going to show you exactly how to do it very soon. But first, why do we use this? You can use this technique as a production technique to define a sound or style, or in mixing to define a sound or style, or for greater overall balance. A lot of the time it's used for low-end definition. In this particular last example I've just played you, its purpose is to aid in low-end balance along with emphasizing or preserving kick transients and headroom. There are two bass parts, a sub and another bass, and then there is a kick drum. So they're all low-end elements, and they're all competing for space in that low end and in the frequency range. You gotta let something win and be dominant, and sidechain compression is a really valuable tool because it allows the kick to poke through the mix at all times, give you that four on the floor feel, and it ducks the bass when the kick hits. That is the most common use of sidechain compression. So I'm going to start with that and show you how to do that right now. I'm just going to mute these again. Then come down to the kick track, which is here. So these are my kick drum hits on the track. Sounds like kick drum. You get the idea. The first thing that you'll want to do is duplicate that track. Now in my template, I always have this kick send track set up. And that's just a mono audio track in my DAW, which is Pro Tools. Whatever DAW you're using, you can do the exact same thing, whether it's Live, Logic, Fruity Loops, whatever it is, you can set this up as well. So you can either come up here and right click on the track and duplicate it, or have this set up in your template, or create a new audio track and take the information from this track, copy it down. So I take all my kick hits, copy it down to the track below. You don't want to monitor this track, meaning you don't want to hear this kick playing again. You don't want duplicate kick sounds in your mix because that's going to overload it. So you want to make sure there's no output. This is not monitored. You don't hear it. Now, if you want, you can take these kick hits and copy them all the way throughout the mix so that on the first, second, third, fourth beat of every bar, you've got a kick hit. That gives you the flexibility to use this effect all the way through the mix and not just when the kick is playing. And you're going to get what I mean in a second. So let's focus on where the kick is actually playing, which is here for now. The next thing you want to do is create a send from this kick send track. So you come here, go to your buses and select any bus. I've got one set up in my template here called Sidechain. And you can call this kick send or sidechain or whatever way you want to name it, as long as it's something that you'll remember. I don't like to just use numbered buses because I'll forget. And then if somebody else has opened up the session, it's a nightmare. Don't do that to people. Just name your buses and your tracks appropriately, please. I'll click the fader to bring it up to 0 and then put this send in pre. That means the signal is always being sent and the effect is always in place, regardless of what happens with this fader. This is the volume fader of that track. If this is at 0 or it's at unity, the same level is being sent all the time through this send. It doesn't matter what's going on over here. That's what pre does. So now you've got a duplicate of your kick track that's not being monitored and it's sending out from a bus. That send now needs to go somewhere and needs to have an effect on other material in the mix. This input signal is the trigger for what you're about to do next. So let's close this and come down to the bass. I'm going to start with the sub. This is the sub track. Pretty standard. Now what you're going to do is put a compressor on this track, which means you have to choose a plugin. And the sluttiest of gear sluts out there are going to have a plethora of plugins to pick from. I'm going to briefly show you 3 that you could possibly use based on my collection, but just to give you an idea of the plugins that you could and should use for this application. The first one is a stock Pro Tools plugin, and that is the compressor limiter. You see here, it lets you assign a key input. That means it lets you take the sidechain as the input signal. You just assign it there. So most stock plugins in whatever DAW you're working in will allow you to do this. Another one you could use is by Waves, and you could use the C1 compressor. Allows you to set a sidechain, go down again, select your sidechain bus, all good. And the one that I use most commonly is also by Waves, and that is the OR compressor, Waves OR compressor. That's this one. It's the one I've used forever, but I wanted to show you that you can use pretty much any plugin, any compressor that is going to allow you to assign a key input. So that key input is this sidechain bus that is being sent from your kick send duplicated kick track. All right, now that that's all clear and you know what plugin to use or plugins to use, let's move on. So this is how you set up the trigger from the kick drum so that it affects the bass. Again, the key input should be the sidechain bus that you sent from the duplicated kick track. This now means that the kick drum triggers the compression. And just before I move on, it's worth mentioning that you do not have to create a duplicate kick track if you don't want to. You could send this direct from your kick drum track. I just like creating a duplicate because it gives me a lot more flexibility, and I can use kick samples in a place where the kick isn't playing. Like I showed you earlier, I could have the kick affecting the bass here even though there's no kick playing. So it can create that sidechain effect when the kick actually isn't playing. If you just send from this kick track, you won't get that desired effect. So that's the flexibility that having a kick send track or a duplicate kick track will give you. All right, so back to the compressor. For this plugin in particular, you should change the character from the warm to the smooth setting. The warm setting adds low frequency harmonics as deeper compression is applied. Smooth avoids these harmonics, keeping the sound as close as possible to the original signal. You don't want to add low frequency harmonics to a situation that requires low end management, so go with smooth. Alright, so let's talk about the settings. For sidechain compression, I like to set my ratio at 4:1. So you can use the slider or you can type it in. 3.99, close enough. And just as a quick compression recap, what the ratio does is adjust the compression or expansion ratio for the signal above the threshold. The attack and release times are in milliseconds. And in this situation, I want the attack time to be as fast as possible. As soon as the attack of the kick drum hits, I want the compression to duck the bass. My attack time is 0.5 milliseconds, so it's a super fast attack time. The attack time will depend on the song, but I prefer this type of attack to control the level of the bass in this instance. The release depends on how you want the effect to sound. A faster release time with quite a lot of gain reduction will give you a pumping effect, and in this situation, that's desirable. This is an effect rather than any sort of transparent compression. So let me play you what this actually does to the bass. Right now it's doing nothing because the threshold hasn't been adjusted, but bring the threshold down. Sound familiar? Now you can hear it start to affect the timing. If I adjust the attack, it's more the bass at the top. Back to where it was. Less of the bass. Adjust the release. You want to get more of a pumping effect. That's the way I like it to sound. It's more percussive, creates more of an effect. Less of an effect, more of an effect. So I'll set my threshold somewhere around here. It's quite musical. Now without it, this is our bass sound. With it back in, and then with the kick drum added, there's more of a vibe. Taking it out, kick and bass are competing for space, less of a vibe. Back in. There's a ton of compression going on, but that works. Now the one other setting that I like to tweak on my compressor is the makeup gain. So the compression is attenuating the signal, as in it's ducking it. So it's taking something like 12 dB off the top of that signal and then ducking it out, bringing it back in as the kick hits. I want to make up that difference in the level adjustment and the perceived loudness. So I want to bump up this makeup gain. So I'm just going to unsolo the kick for a second, play this sub back with compression on and off. Then you just want to make up the difference between the signal when it's bypassed and when the compression is activated. So that's probably about 2-3 dB. So listen. Sounds about right. Without it. It's louder now. Gets quieter. Now it sounds more smooth with the kick in. Without it. Bass kind of disappears with it back in. Just so you know you've got a consistent sound, bypass it. Bring it back in. You get that pumping, swelling sound, nice sidechain compression going. So with sidechain compression added, the kick is much more pronounced and rounder. Even though there's been no direct volume adjustment on the kick track itself, the level of the kick seems much louder. Rather than the bass and the kick fighting each other for space, the kick is pronounced and the bass is supporting with effect. Now, as I already mentioned, there are 2 bass parts in this track. So if I bring in the second bass part along with the sub and the kick, here's what this sounds like. It starts to overpower things a little bit. So what you do is copy the plugin from your subtrack down onto this extra bass part, if you've got another bass part, and play that back to get the same vibe. Already I can hear there's too much going on with the gain, so pull that back. Sounds about right. Then from there you can adjust the level of compression by adjusting the threshold. I liked where it was. You can adjust the release if you want a different effect. This keeps it consistent. This gives you a kind of a lazier feel. And I keep it consistent. And then, as per my example at the start of this video, you could also sidechain some of the lead instruments or pads along with the bass so that the kick cuts through all instrumental elements to create a pumping style effect all the way through the song. Now, there are some great examples of a similar technique used in loads of tracks, but you could pick out the chorus of She-Wolf by David Guetta, not Shakira, or the intro to Crew Love by Drake as examples of how this pumping effect cuts through the whole mix and the kick just punches a hole through everything. So you don't want to add it to your claps, your hi-hats, or your crashes or anything like that. Maybe you want to add it to the synth lead. So let's hear if this works. It could work, but it sort of takes away from my lead part, so it's probably better bypassed. Prefer it like that. Is it going to help my keys? Probably not there. Maybe on this one. Same on the synth parts. Let's try and create this effect on these as well. A little less. An effects track. It's a kind of a sweeping down effect. So let's bring the one from the bass down. Oh, too much gain there. track now with all those effects in. In. And then taking the lead out again. Taking the keys out. So as you can see, it's a process of experimentation. Once you set it on your sub track, on your bass track, so that the kick and the bass and the low end is nicely managed, you can then take that effect all the way through to the other tracks in your mix if you so choose to create more or less of an effect on the overall song. Now this can be a lot of fun. You can mess with the vibe and the timing of your song in a really, really cool way. So have a lot of fun with it and see what you come up with. Now I also mentioned there will be 3 bonus tips on how to use sidechain compression. I would say that using it on different instruments in the mix is a bit of a bonus tip, but I'll give you 3 more. So first, if you work with voiceover and music, if you record voiceovers and you've got a music track underneath, or you've got a vocalist and you've a music track underneath, just think about that. You can use this the same way. Instead of having to ride faders in and out, you can set a sidechain in a pretty nice way, in a very musical way, so that when the voiceover hits or the voice hits, the music just ducks gently in and out, and you can set the release in such a way that it would mimic a fader ride. When you combine this gentle sidechain compression with fader rides, it gives a really musical, really very nice effect. Don't get lazy with this and just automate everything and just use sidechain compression for absolutely everything, but use it to your advantage and let it help you. Another one is de-essing. So let's say I had a vocal track, let's say this wasn't my sub track. You can use a de-esser to take out certain sibilant frequencies in a mix. So you would set your frequency and your range, and every time that sibilant frequency hits, this plugin will take out a few decibels of that frequency. That is a sidechain. Another one that I want you to think about is if you have a singer, a vocalist, and a vocal track on one track in your mix, and you've got an acoustic guitar or an electric guitar or whatever, piano, on another track. You can use the vocal as the input signal to the guitar, piano, or whatever it is on the second track, and you can gently duck the second track in and out with the input signal of the vocal. So same as that idea of the voiceover earlier, you can very gently weave in and out and create a very nice effect. As you heard with this example, it does create quite a nice vibe. In this situation, it's a 4 on the floor kind of EDM feel, but you could create a very nice kind of dreamy effect with a vocalist and an acoustic guitar using the same thing, same technique in a different way. So get creative with it. One other very cool thing, and this is going beyond my 3 bonus tips, this is bonus tip number 4 or 5 or whatever it is, I've lost track. If you add sidechains to your reverb or delay effects, similar to what I did with this downer track I have here, downer effects track, or on a riser, on white noise risers or downers where you have that kind of pumping in and out. You could do this on a vocal delay or a vocal reverb or a synth delay or a synth lead reverb, something like that, to create a very unique, very, very cool effect. You might not have the sidechain on the whole track, but just on your effects. So this video came to me as a request, how to use sidechain compression, how to get consistent results. That's how to do it. I'm sure that's answered a lot of your questions and given you a lot of food for thought and a lot of ways to use this really powerful technique without abusing it. Don't go crazy. Now, if you're wondering how I figured out how to do this or where I first heard it, it was from listening to a ton of music. I mentioned Crew Love, David Guetta. It can be heard in a multitude of tracks. Check out the chorus of Part of Me by Katy Perry. Yes, I say Katy Perry for how it's used to help create a big pop sound. Awake by Tycho in a more relaxed style on a bass guitar. And Massage Situation by Flying Lotus for a glitch hop application of a sidechain. There are 3 to 5 very different tracks. I listen to a ton of music. I am obsessed with it. And that curiosity about music and production is what helps me constantly grow my skills and teach people like you. And I want the same for you. I want you to get the same results. I want you to hear the same things. And if you want to be able to listen to a song and replicate the techniques in that song by ear, then I've got just the thing for you. If you've had enough of creating amateurish sounding music, or even if you're really good and you just want to get to that next level, I highly recommend that you use reference tracks all the time. I mentioned a few there for this specific style, for the sidechain, but you can use reference tracks for anything. It's how we communicate our musical ideas to each other. You mentioned a certain track, a technique, or a lyric, or a kick drum style, or a guitar style that's used in a track, and people have a reference point. It's a type of musical language. And I could go on forever and ever about how referencing will get you so much further than just wandering around the dark, trying to find your sound, trying to find your style, trying to work on your music and trying to perfect it, trying to get pro mixes. But instead of doing that, I want you to get off this video, I want you to get on with your day, but I want to give you something before you go. That is my free guide, the one hack that guarantees a unique pro sounding mix. And if you haven't guessed it already, that one hack is using reference mixes. Now, I don't mean just slapping a track into your DAW and going, that's my reference, I'm going to listen to it every now and again and make sure that my track sounds something like that. No, nothing like that whatsoever. This is a full guide that goes into each area of mixing on balance, EQ, compression, effects, the whole lot, and gives you reference tracks that I've used and other people have used to be able to take their mixes from sounding like they were created in a bedroom to sounding like they were created in a professional studio, even if they weren't. I want you to get amazing mixing results. I want you to have professional sounding mixes and music, and I want you to have that now. So head over to getpromixes.com, download the guide, read it, implement what's in it, and have lots of fun while you're doing it. I hope you enjoyed this video and you know a lot more about sidechain compression now. If you did, hit the like button below, drop a comment, let me know what you learned about this, and don't forget to download the free guide at getpromixes.com. I'll be back with another video very soon, and in the meantime, have fun making great music.